Ray Holt paid $500 for an abandoned lighthouse on the Oregon coast, and on the first morning his dog pressed his nose into the base of the east wall of the keeper's pen and did not move for 6 hours. The Lighthouse, a gray and white German shepherd named Duke, large and deliberate and not given to theatrics, had walked the entire ground floor of the lighthouse twice, methodically, the way he had always walked a new space, and then had stopped at that wall and stayed. Not scratching, not whining, just pressing his nose to the cracked plaster an inch above the baseboard and breathing. Ray had called him 4 times. Duke had not turned around. What was inside that wall had been put there deliberately by a man who died alone in this building 31 years ago, and who had been waiting, in the only way a dead man can wait, for someone exactly like Ray to find it. Nobody buys a condemned lighthouse for $500 expecting to inherit anything. Nobody expects the walls to answer back. Nobody expects to walk into a dead man's life and find that the dead man had seen them coming. But the dog did not move, and the wall held something, and Ray Holt was about to find out that the worst year of his life had been leading him here since the day it started. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe and like this video. And before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing who's out there listening. Ray Holt had come to the Oregon coast because he had run out of other directions. He was 51 years old. He had served 14 years in the Army, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and had come home from the last one with both legs working and something in his sleep that didn't. He had spent 3 years after his discharge doing what men like him do, staying busy, staying physical, taking jobs that required his hands and left his head alone. Construction in Portland, dock work in Astoria, a winter driving timber trucks on roads that demanded enough concentration to crowd out everything else. He was a man in his early 50s, built tall and lean, with the quiet economic movements of someone who has spent a lifetime working. His brown hair, grown a little too long, was streaked with silver at the temples. His face was weathered and rugged, carved by the sun and by memories that were just as harsh. Yet his eyes held a deep, settled kindness that had survived everything. He pulled on his boots, the leather cracked and dark with use. He shrugged into his old brown leather jacket and left it unzipped, revealing the dark flannel shirt beneath. The timber work had ended 8 months ago when the company downsized. After that, Ray had spent 4 months in a rented room in Astoria, doing the kind of nothing that is worse than work. The kind where you sit at a table with a cup of coffee and watch the window and feel time moving through you without your permission. He had not been in good shape during those months. He knew that. He had not been in good shape, and he had known it, and he had not known what to do about it. Duke had been with him for 4 years, gotten from a veterans rescue program in Portland, a shepherd who had washed out of police training for being too calm. Too calm. The trainer had said it like a defect. Ray had thought, that's not a defect, that's a qualification. Duke was 7 now. Gray and white coat that went silver in ocean light, amber eyes that tracked everything without appearing to. He rode in the passenger seat of Ray's truck with his chin on the window edge and his ears reading the air outside, and he had never once been too much trouble and had never once been too little presence. The lighthouse had come up on a county surplus auction site in February. Cape Marin Light, decommissioned in 1987, transferred to county ownership after the last keeper's death in 1993, never sold, never restored, sitting on 2 acres of headland above the Pacific with a cracked lantern room and a keeper's cottage attached, and a county maintenance note that said, structural integrity unknown, enter at own risk. The opening bid was $500. Ray had stared at it on his phone for 40 minutes. Then he had bid. He had been the only bidder. He drove down on a Tuesday in March with Duke and his tools and his cot and his cast iron pan and not much else. The road to the headland was gravel, mostly intact. The lighthouse was 83 feet tall, white with a red band, the paint peeling in long strips that the sea wind had been working on for 30 years. The keeper's cottage was attached at the base. 2 rooms, a kitchen that had not functioned in decades, a single window facing the ocean that was still intact. Ray had stood at the base of the lighthouse for a long time that first morning, looking up. Duke had stood beside him and looked up too for a moment. Then he had gone inside. Ray had followed him in, and that was when it started. The keeper's room was the larger of the two ground floor spaces, maybe 14 feet square, with a low ceiling and walls that had been plastered sometime in the 1950s and not touched since. The plaster had cracked in long, vertical lines from the salt air and the settling of the structure, and in the northeast corner it had bowed slightly outward, a section maybe 2 feet wide that had softened and separated from whatever was behind it. Duke walked to the east wall, not the bowed corner, but the flat section to its left, the section that looked normal, that looked like every other part of the wall, and put his nose to the baseboard and breathed. Ray watched him. He had owned Duke for 4 years. He knew what Duke looked like when he had found a smell worth following. The quick in and out breath, the shift of weight forward, the ears going flat and then upright again in a 3-second cycle. This was not that. This was something else. Duke was not excited. Duke was not hunting. Duke was still in the way he went still when something required waiting. The same stillness he had on the passenger seat in bad traffic. The same stillness he had outside hospital rooms, outside the VA office in Portland, where Ray had gone twice and not gone back. "Duke," Ray said at once, conversationally. The dog's right ear rotated toward him. His nose stayed at the wall. Ray walked the rest of the cottage. He checked the kitchen, the back room, the base of the lighthouse stairs. He came back. Duke had not moved. He crouched down next to the dog and put his hand on the wall. The plaster was cold. It sounded hollow when he knocked on it with 2 knuckles. A dry, papery resonance. The sound of air behind something. The sound of a space that was not supposed to be there. Ray stood up and looked at the wall for a long time. He had learned in the Army to be careful about things that looked like nothing. The thing that looked like a culvert. The thing that looked like a roadside pile. The things that looked like nothing were frequently the things that mattered most. He had also learned that not all of them were dangerous. Some of them were just hidden. There was a difference, and the difference was usually detectable if you were patient. He went to the truck and got a hammer and a cold chisel and came back. Duke had not moved. "All right," Ray said. He was not sure who he was talking to. He set the chisel at the base of the hollow section and tapped it once. The plaster gave easily, too easily, in the way of material that had been disturbed before, that had been cut and reset rather than poured and left. He worked the perimeter, tapping and listening, and the hollow ran about 18 inches wide and 14 inches tall, a rectangle that someone had cut deliberately into the wall and then replastered over. The replaster work was older than the surrounding wall but newer than the original. Different aggregate, slightly different color, in the way old repairs always are if you know what to look for. Someone had opened this wall. Someone had put something inside. Someone had closed it back up. Ray got the section clear in 11 minutes. Behind the plaster was a cavity packed with a layer of fiberglass insulation that had been cut to fit the space precisely, the edges clean. Behind the insulation, wrapped in a layer of oilcloth that had gone dark and stiff with age, was a tin. Not a small tin, a proper document tin, the kind that had been made in the 1940s and 1950s for storing papers, maybe 10 inches long and 6 inches wide and 3 inches deep, with a hinged lid and a simple clasp that had been sealed around its entire perimeter with a bead of plumber's putty that had hardened to stone. Ray lifted it out of the wall. Duke stood up, turned around and looked at him. Then he walked to the window that faced the ocean and lay down and put his head on his paws. Ray held the tin and felt the weight of it and did not open it for a long time. The smell of the insulation and the old oilcloth was in the air of the room now, a smell of time sealed and then released, mineral and dry and faintly of something older underneath, something that pulled at the edge of a memory he couldn't locate. He stood there trying to locate it, and then it came. The supply depot outside Mosul, 2005, August, the smell of a crate they had opened that had been sealed since the first Gulf War, papers inside that nobody had looked at in 15 years, the specific smell of a sealed space given back to air. He was in Oregon. The window was intact. The ocean was outside. Duke did not look up. Ray sat down on the floor of the keeper's room with the tin in his lap. He worked the putty seal loose with the chisel tip, carefully running it around the perimeter until the lid lifted. Inside the oilcloth was the tin, and inside the tin, nested in a folded piece of chamois leather, was a book, a journal. Brown cloth cover, the cloth worn smooth at the corners, the spine still intact. And under the journal, a white envelope, sealed with two words written on the front in ink that had gone brown with age. The two words were, "For you." Ray looked at the envelope for a long time. He did not pick it up. He picked up the journal. On the inside front cover, in a precise, careful hand, Journal of Thomas Earl, Cape Marin Light, begun January 1953, 40 years. The dates on the first and last entries were 40 years apart. Ray opened to the first page and began to read, and outside the window the Pacific did what it always did, indifferent and enormous and steady, and Duke lay at the window with his chin on his paws and did not move until dark. Thomas Earl had come to Cape Marin Light in January 1953 as a 26-year-old man who, by his own account in the opening pages of the journal, needed to be somewhere that the noise stopped. He had served in Korea. He did not describe the service in detail, only that he had been a forward observer for 2 years, that he had called in coordinates, that he had been accurate, and that the accuracy had consequences he now carried with him in a way he could not explain to anyone who had not done the same work. He wrote, "I told myself I needed quiet. I did not know yet that what I needed was purpose. The quiet came first. The purpose took longer." Ray read that sentence twice. He set the journal on his knee. He was sitting on the floor of the keeper's room with his back against the wall and his legs out straight and the evening light coming through the window at a low angle. Duke had shifted position and was now lying along Ray's left leg, the dog's warmth solid through Ray's jeans. Ray had not moved in 2 hours. He was aware that he should eat something. He did not get up. Thomas Earl had taken the keeper's position through a federal program that placed veterans in remote postings. He had arrived in January in a truck with a duffel bag and 4 boxes of books and had stayed for 40 years. The journal covered the full span, not daily, not even weekly in the early years, but returning, always returning, in the way of a man who had found the one form of accounting that worked for him. The first years were sparse, short entries, factual, weather, the light mechanism, maintenance, a boat in distress in March 1954 that he had guided in, the name of the boat and the number of people aboard, and one line after. They made it, I watched them go. Ray turned pages. In 1957, something shifted in the journal. The entries got longer, more personal. Thomas wrote about his sleep, which had been bad for 4 years and was beginning slowly to change. He wrote, "I think the light does something, not the beam, the fact of the light, that it goes out every night and comes back every morning, that it is reliable. I have not been reliable for some years. I am trying to learn from it." Ray's jaw tightened. He turned the page. 1961. Thomas had a visitor, a woman from the nearest town, 12 miles down the coast, who brought supplies twice a month. Her name was Margaret. She had a habit of leaving 1 extra item each delivery that he hadn't ordered. Once a jar of honey, once a paper-wrapped piece of cake, once a single orange. He wrote about these items with a precision that was not about the items. "She left an orange today. I don't know why that matters as much as it does. I ate it standing at the window and watched the water, and it felt for approximately 4 minutes that things were correct." Ray read that paragraph 3 times. He did not know why. He knew why. Duke lifted his head and looked at the door. Then he put it back down. 1967, a gap, 14 months with no entries. Then a single line in January 1968. "I stopped writing for a while. I am starting again. That is all I will say about it." Ray looked at the gap. 14 months. He thought about his own 4 months in the rented room in Astoria. He thought about how gaps happen, not dramatically, not with a decision, just a slow withdrawal from the things that require you to account for yourself. He thought, I know what those 14 months look like from the inside. 1971. Thomas wrote about a boy from the town who had started coming to help with maintenance on weekends. 15 years old, a kid named Paul whose father worked the fishing boats and was gone 6 months of the year. Thomas taught him the light mechanism, the log system, the weather instruments. He wrote, "Paul asked me today why I stay here. I told him because the light needs keeping. He said, 'Doesn't it keep itself?' I said, 'Nothing keeps itself. Everything needs someone to come back to it.'" He paused the entry there, then added one more sentence below a small gap. "I think I was talking about myself." 1979. Margaret had died in March. Thomas wrote one paragraph. "She brought me an orange the first time in 1961. I never told her what that meant. I should have told her. I don't know why I didn't. I know why. I was afraid it would change something. It would have changed something. That would have been all right." Ray put the journal face down on his leg and looked at the window. Outside, the light was gone. Full dark. The ocean was a sound now, not a sight. The low, continuous percussion of water against the headland, patient and indifferent, and somehow, in the dark, less indifferent than that word suggests. More like present. The way Duke was present. The way certain kinds of quiet are present. Ray had not eaten. He did not get up. He picked the journal back up. The 1980s were fuller. Thomas wrote more frequently, sometimes daily, in the winters when the weather pinned him inside. He wrote about the light mechanism aging and the difficulty of getting parts. He wrote about the Coast Guard visits that came less and less frequently as automation made human keepers obsolete. He wrote in 1985, "They will decommission this station eventually. I have known this for years. I have been thinking about what happens to this place after. I have been thinking about what I want to leave." He wrote in 1987, the year the light was officially decommissioned and its operation handed to an automated system. "They don't need me to run the light anymore. I asked if I could stay. They said yes. The cottage is mine as long as I'm alive. That was the original arrangement, and they have no reason to change it. I am going to stay. Not for the light, for the place. There is a difference." He wrote in 1989, "I have been thinking about the person who comes after me, not a specific person. I don't believe in specific people showing up in the right place at the right time. I believe in the long odds of things, the way the right combination of circumstances assembles itself over years, and then suddenly it's in front of you. I think the right person will come here eventually. I don't know when, I don't know who, but I am going to write to them." 1991. Thomas wrote about his health, briefly and without self-pity, a heart that was working harder than it should, a doctor in town who had told him to slow down, a response from Thomas that the doctor had apparently not appreciated. He wrote, "He told me to rest. I told him I've been resting for 38 years and it doesn't mean what he thinks it means." He wrote in 1992, "I am going to seal the journal in the wall, not because I want to hide it, because I want it to last. I want whoever finds it to find it whole." I have also spoken to a lawyer in Coos Bay, a man named Gerald Fitch, whose number I am putting in the envelope, about the disposition of this property. The arrangement is simple. The lighthouse and the land belong to whoever finds what I've left in the wall, not to the county, not to the state, to the finder. Gerald has the paperwork. It has been notarized. It is legal. I checked. Ray looked up from the journal. He was the finder. He looked at Duke. Duke was watching him now. Not anxiously, not urgently, just watching. The amber eyes steady in the dark of the room, the way he watched when something was about to require Ray to do something difficult and Duke was making himself available for whatever came next. Ray looked at the envelope on the floor beside him. "For you," he left it there. He needed to read to the end of the journal first. He didn't know why that felt important. It just did. He turned to the last entry. It was dated November 4th, 1992. Thomas Earl died, according to the county record Ray had seen in the auction listing, on November 19th, 1992, 15 days after the last entry. He wrote, "I have been here 40 years. I came broken, and the place fixed me. Not quickly, not completely, not in ways I can fully explain, but fixed me the way a bone heals. Knitted, usable, never quite the same shape as before. That is enough. That is more than enough. He wrote, whoever you are, and I think I know something about who you are, because I think only a certain kind of person buys a condemned lighthouse for nothing. The same kind of person who once needed to be somewhere that the noise stopped. I want to tell you what I learned here. He wrote, the light doesn't care about you. The ocean doesn't care about you. This is not bad news. It is the best news, because it means the caring is entirely yours to do. You can choose to tend something. You can choose to stay. You can choose to come back after the gaps. And there will be gaps. There are always gaps. I had 14 months once where I could not make myself write a single line, and I came back from that, and the journal was still here, and the light was still here, and the ocean was still here, and nothing required me to explain where I had been. He wrote, live here, that's the instruction, the whole instruction. Live here and tend the light even when it doesn't need tending, and go to the window when things are hard, and let the ocean be what it is. It will do the rest. He wrote, I am leaving a key in the envelope. There is a room at the top of the lighthouse, the lantern room that I have kept locked for the last 11 years. The key opens it. Go up when you are ready, not before. He wrote, I don't know your name. I know enough. The last line of the journal, below a small gap, in handwriting that was slightly looser than the rest. The handwriting of a man writing with less physical precision, but more deliberateness, was, I ostavliaju eto tomu, kto pridet posle, živis des, eto mesto lecit. It was in Russian. Imperfect Russian, written phonetically in English letters, like a man who had learned the phrase from someone else and written it down the way it sounded. Ray did not speak Russian. He looked at it for a long time. He would find out later, from a translator in Coos Bay, that it meant, I am leaving this to the one who comes after. Live here, this place heals. Ray sat on the floor of the keeper's room for another hour after he finished the journal. He did not cry. He was not that kind of man and had not been for a long time, and possibly had never been exactly. But something in his chest had shifted. The way ballast shifts, the way weight redistributes itself when a load is moved, and the structure that held it becomes both lighter and differently balanced, less stable for a moment, and then, after the moment passes, more stable than before. He picked up the envelope. The flap had been gummed shut and sealed with a strip of clear tape that had yellowed with decades and peeled away from one corner. Ray worked it open carefully, the way you open something that has been waiting. Inside was a key, a standard brass key, old-fashioned, with a round bow and a simple 3-notch blade, and a card. Not a letter, a business card. The old kind with raised type. Gerald Fitch, attorney at law, Coos Bay, Oregon, with a phone number that had a different area code than the current one. And below the printed information, in the Thomas Earl's precise handwriting, he is expecting someone to call. He does not know when. He has the papers. Tell him Thomas sent you. Ray looked at the key. He put it in his pocket. He did not call the lawyer that night. He ate something, crackers and canned beans, the most functional meal he had available, and fed Duke, and spread his cot in the corner of the keeper's room, and lay down with the journal on the floor beside him and the key in his jacket pocket that he had hung on the door. He lay awake for a long time. He was not thinking in sentences. He was doing the thing that happens after a very large piece of information arrives, the slow rearrangement of the furniture of your own life to make room for it. Thomas Earl had come here broken in the same way Ray was broken. Not identically, different war, different damage, different specific contours of the thing that had followed him home. But the same architecture of it, the noise that didn't stop, the jobs that required enough of his hands to quiet the head, the withdrawal from anything that required him to account for himself. Thomas had found this place, and it had done something to him over 40 years that he could not fully explain and had tried to write down anyway. And then he had sealed that writing in the wall for the person who would need it next. If you have ever felt like the worst period of your life was something you had to survive alone, like there was no map for where you were, then you already know what it meant to Ray that a dead man had thought ahead about him. Ray did not sleep until very late. Duke slept at the foot of the cot, and the ocean was outside, and at some point past midnight, the automated light above them cycled on for the first time since Ray had arrived, its beams sweeping the dark water in the long, reliable rotation that it had maintained, with and without anyone to tend it, for decades. Ray lay there and watched the light come through the high window above him in its regular interval and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He did not have a name for it. He let it be unnamed. In the morning, he called Gerald Fitch. The phone number on the card was disconnected, which he had expected. He searched the name and found an attorney in Coos Bay, not Gerald, but a woman named Patricia Fitch, who turned out to be Gerald's daughter and had taken over the practice when her father retired in 2009. Gerald was 81 and still alive, living in a care facility in Coos Bay. Patricia knew exactly why Ray was calling the moment he said Thomas Earle's name. She set her coffee down before she answered any of his questions. Ray noticed this about her and found it steadying. "My father has been waiting for this call for 31 years, she said. "He'll want to speak with you directly." Gerald Fitch's voice on the phone was old and thin and entirely clear. He said, "Thomas told me the right person would come. He was very certain about it. I asked him once how he'd know if the right person found it and the wrong person just happened along. He said, the right person will hesitate before opening the envelope. The wrong person will open it immediately. He was particular about that." Ray thought about how long he had sat with the envelope before opening it. "What does the key open?" Ray asked. "Thomas didn't tell me," Gerald said. "He said the person would know when they were ready." After the call, Ray stood in the keeper's room with the key in his hand and looked at the ceiling. Above him, 80 feet of Lighthouse Tower, and at the top, the lantern room that Thomas had locked in 1981 and kept locked for 11 years until the day he sealed the key in the wall. Duke was at the base of the lighthouse stairs. He had not been at the base of the stairs before. Ray looked at him. Duke looked up the stairs. Then he looked at Ray. "Yeah," Ray said. "All right." The stairs were iron spiral, bolted to the central column of the tower. 83 steps. Ray counted them. His boots rang on the iron treads, and the sound went up the tower ahead of him and came back down as something slightly different. Flatter, more contained. The acoustics of a very narrow stone cylinder. Duke came up behind him, his claws ticking on the iron. 8 floors. The salt smell intensified as they climbed. The walls sweated slightly in the March cold. The door at the top was wooden, painted gray, with a standard brass lock that had gone green with salt oxidation around the keyhole. Ray fitted the key. It turned on the second try, a clean rotation, well-made and well-maintained by someone who had oiled it before sealing it away. The lantern room was circular, maybe 12 feet in diameter, all glass above the waist. The original Fresnel lens still in place at the center, the automated mechanism that had replaced Thomas installed around it in a metal housing that looked industrial and wrong in the space the old lens still dominated. The glass panels were salt-hazed but intact. Through them, in every direction, was the Pacific. Ray had expected documents. He had expected something archival, a second journal perhaps, or photographs or more legal papers. There was one thing in the room. On the small wooden shelf that ran below the glass panels on the landward side, placed with care, was a glass jar. Inside the jar, dry and intact and pressed flat by 40 years of containment, was a single orange peel. Not the orange, just the peel, carefully preserved. The bright color faded to a pale ochre, but the shape of it still clear, spiraled in one long, continuous piece. The way you peel an orange when you are in no hurry and want to keep it whole. Ray looked at it for a long time. Margaret had brought Thomas an orange in 1961, and he had eaten it standing at the window watching the water and had felt for approximately 4 minutes that things were correct. He had kept the peel for 32 years. He had locked it in the lantern room in 1981. Why 1981, Ray didn't know. Maybe that was the year the feeling had started to be reliable enough to commemorate. He had kept the key and put it in the envelope for the person who came after. He had wanted the person who came after to know the small things are the proof, not the grand gestures, not the legal inheritance, not the 40 years of tending, the 4 minutes at the window with an orange. That is what the place gave him. That is what it will give you. Duke walked to the window and looked out at the water. Ray looked at the jar on the shelf. He did not pick it up. He stood there for a very long time, in the glass room at the top of the lighthouse, with the ocean in every direction, and the automated light cycling above him, and the dog at the window, and the jar on the shelf. And he thought about a 26-year-old man arriving here broken in January 1953, and a 51-year-old man arriving broken in March, and the 70 years between them that were not, in the ways that mattered, so different. He thought Thomas Earl had never met him. Thomas Earl had known him anyway. Ray Holt stayed at Cape Marin Light. He spent the spring repairing what could be repaired and making peace with what couldn't. The roof of the cottage, the windows, the cast iron stove that had seized up from disuse and came back to life after 2 days of work, and a part he ordered from a salvage supplier in Portland. Walt, a man from the nearest town who ran the hardware store, and appeared at Ray's door one afternoon without being called and stayed for 3 hours. Helped him trace a water leak in the east wall, the same wall Duke had found, now replastered cleanly. Walt never asked about the tin. He seemed to understand, the way some people understand, that the question was not his to ask. Ray called Gerald Fitch once more in April. Not about the legal paperwork. Patricia had handled all of that efficiently, and the transfer was complete. He called to tell the old man that he had gone up to the lantern room. There was a long pause on the line. "What was up there?" Gerald asked. Ray told him about the jar. Another pause. Then Gerald said very quietly, "He never told me. In 31 years, he never told me what was in that room. I always assumed it was something important." "It was," Ray said. He did not try to explain further, and Gerald did not ask him to. The journal Ray kept on the shelf in the keeper's room beside the tin it had come from. He read sections of it sometimes in the evenings, not in order, just opening to pages at random, the way you return to a book that has things still left in it. He found new things each time. A sentence in 1974 about the way fog changes the sound of the water. A line in 1983 about what loneliness actually is, which Thomas defined as not the absence of people, but the absence of the sense that things are witnessed. A note in the margin of a 1969 entry, added later in different ink. "I was wrong about this. I changed my mind in 1977. I don't have room to explain here." Ray had started writing his own journal. Not every day, not even every week, but returning to it the way Thomas had returned to his, after gaps, after the harder stretches, coming back to find it still there. Duke slept at the foot of the cot. In the mornings, he walked to the window that faced the ocean and stood there for a few minutes before turning to look at Ray, which was his way of saying, "We should go outside." They went outside every morning. The headland was 2 acres, and the path along the cliff edge had been kept clear by Thomas for 40 years and needed only maintenance now, not restoration. Ray walked it with Duke each morning in the early light and watched the water do what the water did. He was not fixed. He did not expect to be fixed. He had read enough of Thomas's journal to understand that fixed was not the destination. Returning was the destination. Coming back to the window, coming back to the page, coming back to the work of tending something that didn't need you but was better for your attention. On a Wednesday in June, he drove to Coos Bay and went to the care facility and sat with Gerald Fitch for 2 hours. Gerald was 81 and sharp and had a habit of stopping mid-sentence to look out the window, not from distraction, but from the sense that the window sometimes contained information worth checking. He talked about Thomas the way you talk about someone who shaped the course of your thinking, carefully, with specific examples, with the awareness that you are not fully adequate to the subject. He told Ray that Thomas had asked him, when drawing up the inheritance documents in 1992, whether he thought someone would actually come. Gerald had said, "I think someone might." Thomas had said, "I think someone will. I think they'll buy it for nothing, and they won't know why, and it will be the most important thing they've ever done, and they won't know that either. Not at first." Ray drove back to Cape Marin in the evening. The light came on at dusk the way it always did, automated, indifferent to whether anyone was watching. Ray was watching. Duke walked a half step ahead of him from the truck to the cottage door, the way he always walked when they were home. Inside, Ray lit the stove. He made coffee. He sat at the table with the journal open. His own journal, not Thomas's. And he wrote for a while. Not long. A paragraph. The date and what the light had looked like coming in over the water at dusk. And one sentence about Gerald's pauses at the window. And then one more sentence that he had not planned to write, but that came out anyway. He wrote, I think I know why Thomas wrote in Russian at the end. I think someone said it to him once. Someone who had come back from a different kind of broken and who said the only true thing they knew, and he wrote it down in the only way he could, in the sound of how it felt when he heard it, because he wanted to pass it forward exactly as it had been given to him. He closed the journal. He did not know if that was true. He thought it might be. Outside, the light swept the water in its long, reliable rotation, the same rotation it had made when Thomas Earl stood at this window in 1953 and began to understand that the reliability was the thing. Not happiness, not healing in the way the word is usually used, but reliability, the ability to come back, the ability to keep going out. Duke lay by the stove, his gray and white coat catching the firelight. Ray did not know who had taught Thomas Earl that Russian phrase, or why Thomas had learned it, or what story was behind it. He had asked Gerald. Gerald didn't know. He had found Thomas's story. That story had its own hidden room. He thought with something close to peace that he was all right with not knowing.